Hi, I'm Andre Alphonso, and welcome to the series, The Indian in Me, where I interview people about their stories and about their identity. So, underneath, you're going to see a subscribe button. Please subscribe to this and leave a comment because we would like to hear your stories too. And if you visit our webpage, theindianinme.com, and the link is also in the notes below, please share your story with us.
Welcome to this interview. Now, this is really a very special one. Andre, welcome and thank you so much. This is a rare privilege to be interviewing the interviewer. Thank you, Andre.
Hey, thanks, Richard.
Now, of course, Andre is in our project group for the Indian in Me. And as I'm sure you'll know by now, we are stringing together a number of these interviews with people talking about the Indian in them, Anglo-Indians talking about the Indian in them. And of course, this interest arose from us looking at that hyphen that joins the Anglo-Indian and thinking about a bit of a balance there, because some of us felt that there was an overemphasis on the Anglo side. So we are looking at the Indian side of our Anglo-Indian connection. Well, your skills, I mean, it's just wonderful working with you in the project. And I mean, anyone who's listened to you interviewing others would know, your skill of communication. And that's what I admire about, well, it's one of your many skills, but that's certainly one that's right out there. Now, Andre, I know a little bit of your story, but I know I will discover a whole lot of stuff here when you tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself with a leaning to this, the Indian in me notion, please. But don't feel restrained. Just give us an introduction to the Andre that you'd like us to know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's the name. It's a strange one. And people have often looked at me or heard my name because Alfonso is kind of Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Andre is French. So, people kind of have spoken to me on the phone or have received emails from me, but never met me in person, always take a step back when they see me and they go, goodness, and that's happened a few times. So I think, part of me growing up was sort of coming to terms with my name. And my mum, my mum, she was always like, she didn't like the ordinary. I think I was going to be called Andrew, but someone decided. But mum said, no, that's too simple. Let's cut the W and leave it with E, and we'll put this little acute above the E. And Andre, what a beautiful name. Not realizing that she's kind of destined, in Word, if you type your name out in Word, try to get that little acute. It's taken me years and years and years to master. Basically, I've got to write cafe, backspace the E onto Andre to actually do the thing, right? So, yeah. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Mum. So, yeah, look, my childhood in Calcutta, growing up, my earliest memories that if I go back, and I've tried to go back to, what's the first thing I remember? And I do remember lying in my cot, and my dad used to put me to sleep very often, and he used to have these silk hankies. Give me a silk hanky, which I used to suck my thumb. I didn't have a dummy. I used to suck my thumb, and this finger used to just stroke his hanky. I still remember that. And Dad told me subsequently that it had to be one of his silk hankies because nothing else would work. So that's my earliest memories. A very happy childhood in Calcutta. Lovely, free. And, now looking back, at the time, I wouldn't have thought about it. But now looking back, it was one of privilege because Dad had a really good job. He was, a pretty senior executive in a company. He was doing pretty well. So we had all the trimmings. And, one of the things about living in privilege is you kind of don't know you're living in privilege until you don't have it, right? So I think very happy childhood, loving parents, mum, dad, my two older brothers, quite a distance between us, 6 years between each of us. Didn't really connect with them in the early part of my life. You know, my eldest brother, Adrian, who I'm incredibly close to now, was gone before I even got to know him because he left and went overseas. And Daryl was my other brother was always onto more interesting things than his little brother. Didn't matter. So I was the baby of the family. So, but still very happy childhood. And then boarding school. Of course, we share Goethals.
Yeah.
Boarding school was beautiful. I still tell I should tell all of my children and my grandchildren now ask me, tell me the story that they call me Obi, my grandchildren, about the train trip to boarding school from Seattle station up all the way and all of the different changes we had up to Goethals. Because as you know, there was a train, took you to the ferry, the ghat, you crossed in the train, there's another train on the other side, took you to Siliguri, then the toy train up to Kurseong, and sometimes we had to walk, but sometimes a jeep took us up. So I tell them the story and they love it. Every one of even my grandkids, they tell me the story of you going to boarding school. Because what I remember of that story was the first time I left, I was 7, right? Imagine sending your kids to boarding school at the age of 7. It's like, what were my mum and dad thinking? But I guess that was the standard of the time. Now, I remember this so well, Richard, to this day. And this is part of my story I tell my grandkids. So Daryl, my brother, was supposed to look after me. Now, all of those who may have met Daryl knows he's one of the most irresponsible people that has walked this planet. Charming person, everybody loved him, but don't give him any responsibility whatsoever. So he was charged with looking after me. And you remember the steam trains that used to stop and used to put water and steam and fill it up with coal? So it stopped at this station on the way to the first stop. And I thought, geez, I must be at school. So I hopped off the train. And Daryl was nowhere to be found. I couldn't find him anywhere. He's off with his mates. And the train started.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I was on the platform and I'm kind of looking around. And the next thing I remember, the train was moving and someone picked me up by the collar and dragged me running and then pulled me into the compartment. It was Daryl. And then he slapped me for, for spoiling his afternoon. And it was like not a hard slap. So that was, one of my earliest experiences. But I love boarding school. Goethals was magical for me. And, I wish one of the sadness that it's not sadness, it's not even a regret, it just is I kind of left India too soon. I left India when I was 12, and it's not, you're not really at the formative part of growing up as a boy. You're just before that. So I have lots of memories, but not enough to sort of form my identity. And then we came to Australia. So I loved everything about Calcutta. I remember going to the movies, loved the movies. We used to go to the Globe and what was the other one called? Minerva? Yeah. And
the Lighthouse.
Lighthouse.
Yeah, the New Empire.
I remember bawling my head off to Serve with Love.
Yeah.
My first memory of movies. And in Goethals, all the movies we saw in Goethals, it was stunning. So great time. And then we came to Australia and everything changed for me. So the happiness that I had was really, it disappeared overnight. Mum and dad did the best they could. And, they put me into a fantastic school over here, a Catholic school. And I was the only brown kid in the whole school when I showed up at the age of 12, with all of these surfing guys, because there were, a lot of people from the beaches would come to our school and, they were really cool. And mum put Brill cream in my hair in the very first day I went to school. Brill cream in my hair, so I was so neat with the part down the side. I had a Samsonite bag, shiny shoes, you know, and I spoke with a very thick Indian accent. And of course, I would nod my head, which is thanks. So you can imagine what happened when I showed up at the school.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't accepted. You know, it was like people saw me as different and weird and below them.
Mm.
And that was the thing that kind of, and it took me many, many years, practically most of my life, to reconcile some of those. I guess I would call it, everyone has traumas to different degrees, but that was my trauma of hating school, absolutely hating it, and wanting to get out of it as soon as I could. And the other side of it, Richard, which is kind of really important for what we're talking about, was dropping the Indian in me. Right? So
Mm.
I lost my accent, and I still, to this day, if someone asks me to do an Indian accent at a party or something like that, it just doesn't come out. I cannot do one. It's a crappy Indian accent,
Mm.
you know? So I lost it. I forced myself to do that. I forced myself to become as Australian as I could. I forced myself to not play cricket because that was the thing the Indians did really well, but rather to play, rugby and stuff like that. So, and I was never really good at those sorts of sports. So whereas Gathal's, I was fantastic. I was fantastic at hockey. It wasn't offered here. I was fantastic at soccer, football. It wasn't offered here. It was rugby and cricket. So I really forced myself to downplay the Indian in me because, I wanted to try and fit in because I couldn't stand, people dissing me, as you kind of grow up with you. So that was not fun for me. It wasn't fun for me.
Mm.
So so I in a really strange way, it was much later in life that I embraced the Indian in me. And the other thing, which is probably the Anglo and the Indian, so the hyphen, uh, you know, a lot of our beliefs, the belief systems we have, are implanted in us when we really don't have the wherewithal to argue it, right? So it's through your parents, it's through your teachers, and you agree to it. You make an internal commitment, and you don't know that that is kind of the software that's going through your brain. And I grew up with that notion that the Anglo-Indian was better than the Indian.
Mm.
And it was very apparent, it was very apparent in the way the conversations were had when people would say to mum, "Oh, you must be Indian," and mum would say, "No, I'm not Indian, I'm Anglo-Indian," and then would go through some whole lot of history about we come from here and this is where it's from and the names here, going through, you
Mm.
know, probably too much information that people needed. And I took that on probably until I was about 50, when people would say, and my identity was one of uh, being Anglo and really pushing the Anglo side of it, or the name, and oh yeah, my heritage goes back to Ireland and Italy and da da da. Would really play up the Anglo, saying nothing about the Indian. And that was the kind of, and the interesting thing and the arrogance of it all. And I have to look at myself and say that as I look back at my life now, the arrogance of Andre Alfonso, because, in those days, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, if you went down the street or you walked into a shop and there was another Indian person with brown skin, they would make eye contact and smile at you, right? And I always found that disturbing because I wasn't them.
Mm.
No, 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 don't smile at me. I'm not like you. And I had no idea. It's only now when I look back at those years of my life that I look back and I'm mortified, absolutely mortified that that belief system that I carried all the way through was kind of ingrained in me. And then, you know, um, I went married, kids, all that sort of stuff. We decided to go back to India when I was 50 years old, after 38 years of living away. I'd never been back. With an Australian accent, couldn't speak Hindi, midlife crisis. I decided to take my kids back to India, and I fell in love with it for the first time. You know, it was a love affair with an amazing country and amazing people. And I actually feel quite emotional thinking about how I betrayed the Indian in me for almost 50 years. Because it is such a rich and beautiful country. The people are come from, you know, generally speaking, from a values structure which is so embracing and generous and giving and fun and enjoyable, but also deep and philosophical and spiritual and ancient. And you know, all of those things, you kind of just go, what happened? Why did I lose, you know, all of that, coming here? So yeah, that's my story, mate.
So, but it's interesting because, you know, and I mean, the honesty in which you express that, I'm sure will resonate and impress people watching this interview. But what is there, and what you even expressed, is it wasn't hard for this love affair to come back because the seeds were already there. So tell us a bit about those deeply implanted memories, the memories of maybe taste, of smell, of, you know, when you're like, because when you played with your fathers with that one finger, you touch the silk. So it's that kind of sensory, visceral kind of memory that kicks in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that you didn't lose that.
No.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the strangest thing is when I landed back after 38 years in India, you know, with all of the baggage that I'd picked up around the Anglo and not the Indian, it kind of went very quickly. It went very quickly. And, you know, for the first time in my life, my adult life, I actually felt like I was in a place where I belonged, rather than a place I was trying to fit into. And you know, there are moments even to this day when I feel, as Australian and as successful as I am, and you know, I love Australia. I love, like you love, Australian cricket team. I love the Wallabies. It is my passion. You know, I will. I'm a what we call a Wallabies or rugby tragic. With all of that, there are times even to this day, where I don't feel that I belong here, that I'm fitting in. And the difference between belonging and fitting in, I didn't appreciate until I stepped into India, which was, I belong. This is the place I belong to. But you know, and the thing is, I actually belong to Australia as well. So it's this really difficult trajectory, or this precipice that you navigate in terms of identity, because in some degree I embrace the Australian so much, and at the same time embrace the Indian part of me, and that's I guess the richness of the Anglo-Indian, so to speak. But coming back to your question, is the memories. So I'll share one with you. One of the things when we went to boarding school, you know, Mum would make tons and tons of jam that we would take, and it was supposed to last us the whole year. But the food, as you know, Richard, in boarding school was shit. Right? So we would take our tuck box, and there's two things that happened. If I didn't eat it first, Daryl would raid my tuck box and take it, right? So you went through everything really fast. And Tapari jam or gooseberry jam that Mum used to make for us was just one of those things. And I'd forgotten about it because we don't get gooseberries in this part of Australia here. And when I went back, and you know, I'd forgotten about it, didn't even think about it. You know, it's like dormant, gone. And Denise, my cousin, made me one when this is, you know, 38, 40 years later, Tapari jam one day and said, "Hey, Andre, you want to try this Tapari jam?" And first of all, the name, I'd forgotten Tapari jam. What is Tapari jam, right? Gooseberry.
Mm.
And I put it on some toast and I tried it. God knows, Richard, from back here,
Yeah.
the little neuron of my brain cell that used to love Tapari jam after 40 years woke up and went, "Oh my God, Tapari jam," you know? And I can't tell you how many jars of Tapari jam I consumed with Denise. So those sorts of memories of, taste are so strong. Smells of not just the normal smells, the smells of the humidity, smells and boarding school. I still remember getting up and looking across the valley at Mount Kanchenjunga, right? Or the range that we used to have up there. And people, it's like walking across and looking at the opera house and not even seeing it. We stopped seeing it over there, but it was one of the most spectacular things that we had, and we just took it for granted, and yeah, so there's lots of those memories that came back to me because I took my kids when I went back. We did the train, the story I used to tell, I was telling my kids about the story. We relived the story,
Oh,
except it's now 40 years later, and we got the train at Sealda. It's called the Darjeeling Mail, right? And we took it all the way to Siliguri, and we took the toy train up to Kurseong, um, stayed in Kurseong, and then took a jeep the next day up to Githols. So it was one of the best things I've done for my children, I think. But, for them, it was like, yeah, it's interesting, Dad. But for me, it was just like, you don't understand how important this is. We are actually retracing some of the best memories I have of my life. I'm sure they didn't pick up the significance of it, or they might have, but they didn't say much. And then we walked into Githols, and it was in the middle of winter, so it was pretty cold, and nothing was open. And it was just such a buzz going back there and taking my children with me. So yeah, brilliant.
that's wonderful. Yeah, this is the thing that we share in this project, Andre, isn't it? This opportunity of truth telling, and I'm sure your children, when they watch this interview, they'll understand a little bit more of you, and that proud connection that you've made. That I mean, no one has a timeline on when you have to join the dots. But it is important that we join the dots. That's what we are saying in the project. That we think back with it's in celebration. I mean, we're talking here about not being critical, but being celebratory about these reflections, these thoughts. I think you've just opened that up superbly, and I'm sure they'll enjoy that too.
There's a postscript, Richard, if I can just share it with
Yeah,
you, because I said to you before we went, when you would come across someone who might have been Indian or Sri Lankan or something like that in the shopping center, they would look at you and I'd kind of look away. Well, I got to tell you, now I'm the guy. I'm the guy looking at them, going up and saying, "Hey, if I'm in an Uber and the driver is
yeah.
Indian or a taxi, I do what I never did. I
Mm,
talk to them. I ask them where they're from. I ask them about their lives. We talk and share about, our love of the country, which is such a difference. It's almost like a light switch difference after
yeah.
living there for 4 years. And I loved it so much that, we went there in 2008 and started up a business. And then the best thing about all of it is Kathy, my wife, fell in love with India in a very different way to the way I did. A different relationship with the country, completely different to the one I had. And my two youngest daughters came with me, and the same thing happened there. It was a very different relationship they have with India than the one I have. But
Mm,
that's okay. Kathy is so embraced of it so embraced it so much that we went back. We used to go back twice, three times a year to just under the excuse of, oh, we've got to go and look after the business. The business was fine without us, but it was a fantastic reason to go back and be with the people that we got to know and love, friends we'd made, and they all there weren't many Anglo Indians. My cousin over there is definitely Anglo Indian. There's a couple of people who were the Anglo Indians that we would talk to, but 90% of the people that we hang out with and love dearly are, people from India. That's how they identify, not as Anglo Indians, and yeah. So I just share that with you.
Yeah, and in all of this, Andre, you are reflecting, aren't you, on your identity, the richness of your identity. In fact, I just love the way in what you said so far. You rejoice in joining the dots. I just think that's just wonderful, because that's what our project is about. And in each one doing it in their own way. I mean, there's no formula for this, but doing it in your own way. And having met Kathy, I mean, it's she is also a part of that, isn't it? That part of the celebration, because she's just such a positive person too, isn't it? And in making all of that possible and enjoyable,
Yeah.
and sharing that.
Well,
That's
I'm very lucky because, when we made the decision to go to India within microseconds. It wasn't long. We had an opportunity came up to open a business in India. And I remember coming back. So I had a conversation with my boss at the time, who gave me the green light to go over there and open a business under the brand that the company that I work for. So that was a key part of us going there. And I remember talking to him on the phone, and the idea came up, and it was like, wow, that's an interesting idea. I'd like to think about. And I came back in, it was at 7 o'clock in the morning because it was the US, their evening, our morning. And I said to Kathy, hey, I've got a thought. What do you reckon about we go and live in India, quit here, pack up our house, go and live in India 3 to 5 years, set up a business? What do you think? And she said, what? And I said, yeah, I just spoke to Ed, my boss, and he thinks he'd want to support it. And Richard, that was it. That was the conversation. He said, yes, nothing else. Yes, that was it. Done. We're doing. The decision was made within a minute. That's what we're going to do. And that's what we did. And it's the best thing we've ever done in our lives. By far, that decision to go back changed me as a human being and my identity, as I've shared with you. It changed the confidence that I have as a person. I removed the mask that I've been wearing most of my life,
yeah,
because to try and fit in and belong
yeah,
here, you have to put on these masks,
yeah,
and just kind of just tapping into who the hell am I,
mm,
as a human being. It's a journey of discovery. So I was
mm,
very lucky with Kathy that she, a lot of people would have said, no way, we've got a house and a home, we've got kids at school. We're not going to disturb all of that. So we did the adventure of a lifetime, and it was an adventure of a lifetime.
Audrey, I can remember you telling me about this idea and the fact that you were thinking about it. And I think, like most people, I thought something like, what? And this thing about this fear about, what about the security of it all? And what are you giving up? And can you make up the ground? And what about the difference in value of the rupee and the dollar and all of that kind of stuff? But I have to say, there is a point I wanted to make without, it sounds like a question, but don't answer it. What if someone said, Andre, we'd like you to go to Brazil and start a business there? And you see, because when we talk about the Indian in me, the, the fact that it's India that they're asking you to go and do the scene, that also raises another part of your lost memory, that you kind of almost open yourself to, you know.
Mm.
And that's just a question I wanted to just put
Yeah.
on the table there,
Yeah, it's interesting if they said Brazil. I don't know what my reaction would have been. They said India. and it just clicked in that moment.
That's right.
And in a strange way, Richard, because the company that I ran was a Forum India. It was a company that trained leaders how to be leaders.
Mm,
And people often asked me, why are you doing that over here? And I often thought, you know what? One of the things about that I can make a difference in the country of my birth
mm,
was actually helping people show up on the world stage. These are leaders and executives in India without being apologetic, with the confidence, and not the people who'd left India and gone and worked in the US, because they have the confidence. But you would see we would have I would be in a room full of executives, and an American would walk in, and the conversation would stop, the discussion would stop, and there was a reverence. And I
mm,
just wondered, why, why? And part of the joy I had in running this leadership development company was, giving back to, the land of my birth, something. Maybe it was the betrayal, maybe my book should be the betrayal of the land of my birth, because that's kind of what I did when I came here. I actually pushed it down. I pushed it out of my consciousness right down here.
yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
was like, yeah,
I don't like the word betrayal in your title of the book. I'd have a much more positive spin to that, because it's really it's that thing about rediscovering, reconnecting,
yeah,
opening up. Because in your story, one of the lovely things about what you said is there's a lightness. It's almost as if some lead was taken out of that rucksack, of having to conform, having to be someone else. And suddenly you talked about the mask. I mean, that's a wonderful metaphor, of the likeness. So I think somewhere the mask was taken off, and maybe that could appear in the title of your book.
yeah. I think you're
But,
right. I think
but
you're right. I think,
yeah, Andre, I want to just take you to another um, a question, maybe, and you've alluded to this. You've talked about your children and including them and wanting to share the story with them. Um, but you could even move wider, not just your children, but in this kind of the relay that we're in, um, the baton that you pass to the next generation or about what you've learned. So, what do you pass on from what you've learned in this great journey that you've described?
wow, great question. I think what I'd like to, because it's a work in progress, it's
Mm,
not that defined yet what it is. I think the main thing is to be a good human being, and it sounds so trite, and it sounds like, yeah, everyone says that over here. But we kind of live in a world that is more and more divided. It is more and more to do with us and them. And it scares me. It scares me a lot that, and I've seen it in Australia as well. When I remember when we had the riots in Cronulla, it was the Muslim riots that happened. And this was in the 90s, not long ago.
mm,
And my elder daughters, who were kind of teenagers at the time, were actually scared of going out of the house, because they had, because their mum was Australian, I'm Indian. They had that kind of Muslim look about them, perhaps. So they were really scared about that. And that hurt me a lot, because why should this land be so divided? And, all of my, growing up and going to school over here was a one of division. And I kind of don't like it. I don't like it. I just don't. It just irks me when I see that happening, and even when I'm observing that happening. So I just want, if I can in some way, is to get them to bridge rather than divide. I don't like it, and it's kind of like my passion project right now is looking at it. I react very negatively to stereotypes of race,
yeah.
and things like that. It just hits triggers in me that I don't know where it comes from. It's deep down inside. So I just want them to be that, and if I ever, I don't know, I think they will. I really have so much confidence looking at them growing up. Um, all five of them. So, Mitchell is my stepson. Um, here's a lovely story. Because Mitchell's my stepson. He's going to be 40 this year. I've known him since he was 18 months old.
Mm.
And his mum and myself got together. And I'm his dad, right? He calls me dad, and I am his dad and always have been his dad. And I don't see him any other way other than dad as his son, right? And sometimes when people look at us because he is, fair skin and blue eyes and stuff like that, um, they ask what's the relationship. And when Mitchell came to India, this was the beautiful thing that happened. Two things happened, right? Two things that that will never kind of leave me. The second one, I'll go back to the first one in a minute because it makes me a bit emotional. The second one, we went to a party, right? We went to one of these expat parties, and Mitchell was there and he's dancing, and someone came up to him and said, "Who are you? I haven't seen you here before. Who are you?" And they said, "Oh, I'm Mitchell. I'm Andre's son." And this person was, one of the experts and said, "No, no, no. You must be adopted or something like that. You couldn't be a son." No, that's my dad, right? This was when Mitchell was in his 30s, right? Or 20s or something like that.
Mm.
The first instance, right? The first instance was when we were in New Zealand. And, he started calling me dad. He was pretty close to 8 or 9 or 10 years old, in the brutal schoolyard. And I'd gone to pick him up one day from school. There was a new school he was in, and someone had seen me. So they started hassling him, and ended up, I was called to the school, or we were called to the school because he got into a fight against another guy, another boy.
Mm.
And he got into the fight defending me, right? And it was, that's the bridge, right? That's kind of the bridge I kind of want to see with my kids. That acceptance of everyone, and I think they will. I actually think they absolutely will.
Oh, that's just a wonderful, wonderful way to kind of come to a close in this interview. But that resonates with us here in Australia just so much, because I mean, the indigenous people, this country, I mean, there needs to be a truth telling, widely, and the bridging of those gaps that you so eloquently talked about. I think it's just wonderful. Now, Andre, the only thing I'd like to say is there anything else that you'd um, like to say about this, because you know about the terrain, about this area? Anything you feel you've forgotten to say, or you'd like to put in as a PS? Because here's the opportunity. It's such a
Well,
lovely.
I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So no, I think, enough has been said from me. Um, I think underneath all of it is humanity. So, I really believe that a secondary identity is really that of, who we are, where we're from. The first one is that, we just humanity. Yeah, we're just people. We have more in common than we have differences. Yet we pull out these freaking differences time and time again, and it just shits me.
Hmm.
Why not pull out the commonalities that exist? Yet, as this world goes on, we're pointing at differences more and more, and it just sucks. And that kind of is, yeah, I'm just repeating what I said before, but it just fires me up when I think about it. So the message is, let's look for commonalities. Let's not look for what holds us together and makes us strong, as opposed to what divides us and separates and makes us weak.
Oh, Andre, that's just brilliant. Thank you so much. And it's such a lovely way to end and to look to the next interview in this series, which I'm sure you'll be presenting. So thank you very much. Thank you for your great contribution, and thank you for this interview.
Well,
Thanks.
can I just say, Richard, I've never had this conversation with anyone yet. Well, I have bits of it, of course. But the fact that, we're here has kind of allowed me to open up a little bit more than I possibly normally would. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Andre.
So just to wrap it up, thank you again. And thanks for watching, everyone. So once again, please click on the subscribe button and leave a comment. We would love to hear your stories as well. Yeah. So please share them on our webpage, theindianinme.com. That's one word, theindianinme.com. The link is below. And I will have some more interviews to share, and I hope you can join us again. So I'm Andre Alphonso, and thanks for watching this interview series, The Indian in Me. See you next time.